Donnie was a young man from a small town in England who had always dreamed of becoming a big stand-up comedian. He moved to London, certain that by the time he turned 30, he would be a millionaire and his life would be set. But life, as it often does, had other plans. By the age of 29, instead of headlining comedy clubs, Donnie found himself working as a simple bartender. Living in a city as expensive as London was tough, so he stayed rent-free with his ex-girlfriend Keely's mom, while Keely herself lived in another city for work. One day, a middle-aged woman walked into the pub where Donnie worked. She looked distressed, and when Donnie went over to take her order, he found out she didn't even have enough money for a cup of tea. Feeling sorry for her, he offered her a cup on the house. The woman, whose name was Martha, began to boast about her life. She claimed to be a successful lawyer, with awards to her name and daily meetings with famous politicians like David Cameron and Nick Clegg. She said she owned flats in Pimlico, Bexley Heath, and 2 in Belsize Park. But after she left, Donnie couldn't shake the question from his mind. If she was so wealthy, why didn't she have enough money for a simple cup of tea? The next day, Martha returned and began to threaten Donnie. This became a daily routine. She would come in, dressed differently each time, and announce she was in a hurry because she had a meeting to attend. Then, she would spend the whole day chatting with Donnie. She often praised him, saying he was so handsome he should be banned from public places. Everyone likes a bit of flattery, and Donnie was no different. He enjoyed the attention, even though Martha often rambled on about people he didn't know. Whenever Donnie cracked a joke, she would laugh so loudly that others in the pub would turn their heads in surprise. Occasionally, they joked about running away together. She even began to call him, "my dear reindeer." On some days, Martha seemed deeply sad, as if something terrible had happened to her. Donnie found himself sympathizing with her more and more, trying to cheer her up with jokes and conversation. His friends at the pub started to think Martha was Donnie's girlfriend, and in passing, they even mentioned marriage. Donnie fell silent at the thought. Martha was a 42-year-old middle-aged woman, and he had only been trying to make her smile, not lead her on. But Martha seemed to think differently. She immediately suggested that if Donnie married her, he would become half-owner of her properties. She mentioned that she had recently bought a penthouse and just needed someone to hang curtains in it. Donnie, trying to lighten the mood, joked that he'd hang her curtains, but Martha took him seriously. Before long, Martha somehow got hold of Donnie's email address and began sending him hundreds of emails day and night. Then one day, she showed up with a plan to go on a picnic. Donnie was at a loss, unsure how to refuse her without hurting her feelings. Donnie couldn't help but feel that Martha's behavior was almost childlike. He suspected that something terrible must have happened to her in the past, which had left her like this. But Donnie, trying to gently deflect her, explained that they weren't a couple, just good friends. Instead of a picnic, he suggested they go out for a cup of coffee as friends. After his shift ended, Donnie took Martha to a nearby coffee shop. She seemed especially happy that day, laughing out loud at any of Donnie's punchlines. When the waiter came to take their order, Martha only asked for a glass of plain water. Donnie, puzzled, asked her why. She replied that she didn't have much of a budget. But this was the same woman who always talked about millions. Yet she didn't have enough money for a cup of coffee? Something didn't add up. During their conversation, Martha noticed that Donnie seemed a bit upset. Her mood changed instantly, and she demanded to know who was bothering him. She even created a scene in the coffee shop, making it seem like she was ready to confront or even harm whoever was troubling Donnie. After calming her down, Donnie managed to send her home, but he was left with more questions than answers. Who was this woman, really? And what was the deep secret hidden behind her erratic behavior? Determined to find out, Donnie started following her. He discovered that Martha lived alone in a house that looked more like a junkyard than a home. As he watched her from a distance, he suddenly received an email from Martha. Spooked, he quickly left the area. A few days later, Donnie had a stand-up competition. He had made it to the semifinals and was excited to perform. But when his turn came, none of his jokes landed and the audience sat in complete silence. Just when he thought all was lost, a woman's loud laughter broke the silence. It was Martha. Seizing the moment, Donnie began to joke about her, and to his surprise, the audience erupted in laughter. For the first time in a long while, he saw people genuinely laughing at his jokes. It was the victory he had always dreamed of, and he realized he owed it, in part, to Martha. Later that night, Donnie logged onto Facebook and saw a friend request from Martha. Curious, he accepted it and began scrolling through her posts. He quickly realized that most of them were fake. Intrigued, he did a search for her name along with the word lawyer and was shocked by what he found. Martha was a notorious stalker. She had been fired from her job for harassing her boss, after which she began following him everywhere. She even filed a false report accusing him of mistreating a disabled child. At one point, she had made a violent attack on her boss's mother, which had landed her in prison for 4 years. It seemed that once Martha fixated on a man, she wouldn't leave him alone until he was forced to take her to court. As Donnie scrolled further, he noticed that Martha had started commenting on even his oldest posts. Her jealous remarks about his ex-girlfriend, Keely, made it clear what she thought about Donnie. A few weeks later, Donnie met a beautiful trans woman named Terry. This was their 6th date, and Terry, noticing how secretive Donnie was, jokingly said he was a bit strange. She teased that she hoped she wouldn't end up as the subject of a crime headline someday. Donnie laughed it off, telling her that he just liked the peaceful atmosphere of the cocktail bar they always met at. But the reality was more complicated. Donnie had met Terry on a transgender dating website. To protect his identity, he had changed both his name and occupation on the site. Terry was open-minded, silly, funny, everything Donnie wasn't. She had moved to London 6 years ago and worked as a therapist. Since meeting her, Donnie had been happier than he had been in a long time, but he was also terrified. He feared that if anyone close to him found out he was dating a trans woman, his life would be ruined. So, when it came to meeting face-to-face, he chose a dimly lit cocktail bar at the far end of the city. The next morning, Martha showed up at the pub, looking for Donnie. He hadn't been there the day before, and she immediately assumed he had gone to meet his ex-girlfriend, Keely. She began ranting about Keely in such a vile way that even an 80-year-old man would have been ashamed to hear it. Donnie's mind raced. If Martha reacted like this about Keely, what would she do if she found out about Terry? The thought kept him awake at night. Before his relationship with Terry could be ruined by Martha, Donnie decided to tell Terry everything. They met the next day, and Donnie explained the situation in detail. Before long, he received over 100 emails from Martha. As Terry checked the emails, she noticed something strange. "Why does she call you Donnie?" she asked.
Donnie froze.
He had told Terry his name was Tony on the dating site to keep his identity hidden. Now, one lie was leading to another. He stammered, "She calls me by a lot of names. Wrestler, Bilf Sonda, and Baby Reindeer." Terry seemed to believe him, especially since there were countless emails addressed to Baby Reindeer. That was why Donnie had kept their relationship a secret. But Terry had had enough. She told him in no uncertain terms that she was tired of meeting in secret. She gave Donnie an ultimatum. Either convince Martha to move on from his life, or Terry would come to the pub, the Hart in Camden, to confront her herself. And on that day, there would be a showdown. Terry knew about the pub from one of Martha's many emails. If Terry ever found out that Tony wasn't actually in the construction business but worked as a bartender at the very pub called the Hart, all his secrets would be exposed. The thought of this made him furious. He had tried everything to get rid of Martha, but nothing worked. Frustrated, he showed Martha's emails to his coworkers, hoping they could help ban her from the pub. Instead, his friends, ever the pranksters, decided to play a joke on him. Given their sense of humor, you can imagine what kind of inappropriate joke they must have pulled. Donnie couldn't sleep that night, worrying about what Martha would think after seeing the email. The next day, he took the day off and rushed to meet Terry. Today, Donnie was unusually energetic. Terry liked this new version of Tony. After arriving at the bar, he felt a sense of freedom, as if all the chains that bound him had been broken. He was no longer afraid of what people thought because everyone at the Hart was different from the norm. While they were talking, Terry asked, "What's your real name?" Tony was caught off guard. He realized that Terry probably suspected something, knowing that people like him often hid their real identities. Tony confessed his real name and explained that he had been afraid to use it on the dating website, which is why he lied. Terry understood his dilemma and decided to give him another chance, hoping that this time, things would work out. After spending some time together, Terry invited Tony to her home that evening. He caught the train, feeling like this was the beginning of a new chapter in his love story. The coach was full of passengers, and Tony noticed that people were staring at him, especially seeing him with a trans woman. While he felt confident among people like him, the moment he was surrounded by normal people, he shrank like a wet cat. It felt as if everyone knew his secret. Overwhelmed with fear, he abandoned Terry at the next station and ran away. He had been given one last chance, and he had let it slip through his fingers. When he finally made it home, Martha was standing there, waiting for him. The email his friends had sent had clearly stirred things up. Martha was ready to do anything for Donnie, no matter how strange his requests might be. Donnie, terrified, tried to explain that it was all just a joke his friends played on him. But Martha didn't take it well and began misbehaving with him. Desperate to escape her, Donnie decided to take a few months off from the pub. For weeks, he isolated himself, staring blankly at the ceiling fan in his room. Then one day, summoning his courage, he went to Terry's house. He knocked on the door and said, "Ma'am, there's a delivery for you." When Terry opened the door and saw Donnie standing there, she cursed under her breath and walked away. Donnie wasn't sure what to do. Was she inviting him in or telling him to leave? But since she left the door open, he decided to go in. Terry was still upset about what had happened, but she gave him 5 minutes to explain himself. In those 5 minutes, Donnie told her everything, the truth about his name, his job, his address. But Terry wasn't impressed. She asked, "What's your goal in life? What do you want to become? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? It felt more like a job interview than a conversation with a potential partner. Then Donnie confessed that he wanted to become a comedian, like Jimmy Carr. Terry, who already had doubts about him, was now convinced that he was completely useless. She pushed him out of her house. That day, Donnie realized how important it was to be honest with someone you care about. He had lied about his name, his job, everything, fearing what people would think of him. It had been more than 10 days since Martha had last contacted Donnie. Just when he thought she might be gone from his life, she suddenly showed up at his house. Panic set in because Keely's mom had allowed him to stay there rent-free on the condition that he wouldn't bring any outside troubles home. If he didn't take action immediately, he would be homeless. Desperate, Donnie threatened to call the police. Martha, startled, left quietly, and the next day, her emails stopped. She even stopped following him. Could the mere threat of police involvement be enough to get rid of Martha? Donnie wasn't sure. As he was walking home one day, he saw Martha sitting at the bus stop in front of his house. She would sit there for hours, hiding whenever Keely's mom was around. And whenever Donnie passed by, she would make colorful comments. Sometimes, even at 2 a.m., she would still be there, waiting for him. As days passed, Donnie noticed a change in her. First, she stopped commenting, and then she started looking sad. The cold had set in after the rains, and she would sit at the bus stop for hours, just to catch a glimpse of him. One night, Donnie managed to sneak home at 3 a.m. Martha was still there, waiting for him. He feared that she would die of cold if this continued, so he convinced her to go home. He begged her to stop crying and pleaded with her to stop following him. "I don't have the money to rent another place," he told her. "This is the end for us." He hoped that this would finally get her to stop sitting outside his house, but it had the opposite effect. A week later, Donnie's ex-girlfriend Keely came home from work. Martha had made his life hell, constantly harassing him. Keely warned him that if his psycho girlfriend, Martha, didn't stop, she would tell her mom, and Donnie would be out on the street. He had already lost his job because of Martha, and now he was on the verge of being homeless. That night was the semi-final of his comedy competition. Donnie hoped that making it to the final would finally give him a way out of the nightmare that had plagued him for the past 4 years. As soon as the show started, Donnie's turn came. He poured his 5 years of experience into his performance, and the audience was loving it. But then, in the middle of his set, a woman started humming a song. It was Martha. In an attempt to keep the momentum, Donnie joked, "Thanks, stranger friend." But Martha responded loudly, "I'm not a stranger. Tell everyone I'm your ex." Donnie, trying to keep the mood light, introduced her as his stalker. But this infuriated Martha. "How dare you say that?" she screamed. "I'll show everyone your reality." She began showing the audience the email his friends had sent as a joke. Security eventually dragged Martha out, but by then, she had ruined Donnie's performance. He was so angry that he started throwing things backstage. Terry, who had come to the show, found him, and they managed to sneak out through the back door. Terry couldn't believe that Donnie was running away from a middle-aged woman like this. Despite everything, Terry did feel sympathy for him, but she wasn't willing to give him another chance. Just then, Martha appeared, her temper flaring at the sight of Donnie with another woman. She began hurling insults at Terry, so vile that even Donnie's mood darkened. Martha claimed that she was there on a date with Donnie and demanded that Terry leave immediately. The situation escalated, and Martha started to fight. They managed to separate her from Terry, and Donnie made it clear to Martha that she was delusional. He had never loved her and never would. Martha left in tears, and Terry was shaken. What would be the end of this story? Stay tuned to find out in the next video.